There's a version of being an empath that feels like a curse when you're younger. You feel too much, you think too much, you notice too much. You walk into a room and your body is already reading everything. Who's tense? Who's fake smiling? Who's quietly irritated? Who needs something? And it can make you feel fragile, overwhelmed, behind in life. But later, something shifts. Not because you magically stop feeling, because you finally learn what your sensitivity is actually for. And in a moment, I'll name the exact turning point that makes an empath powerful later in life. The part most people miss, the part that changes everything. First, a quick scene. You're younger, and someone says something slightly off. A small jab, a subtle disrespect. You feel it. You know it happened, but you doubt yourself. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You try to stay nice. You swallow it. Now imagine the same moment later in life. You feel it again, but you don't spiral. You don't explain it away. You don't chase their approval. You just see it clearly. That's power, not domination, not ego, clarity. The empath personality becomes powerful later in life because you stop using sensitivity as a radar for danger and start using it as a compass for truth. Early on, empathy is mostly about survival. Later, it becomes discernment, and discernment changes your whole life. Here's the first reason it becomes powerful. Later in life, you stop needing to be liked by everyone. When you're younger, being liked can feel like safety. If people approve of you, your body relaxes. If they don't, your system panics. So you become accommodating. You become easy. You become the person who doesn't make things difficult. But later, if you do the inner work at all, something happens. You start preferring peace over performance. You stop asking, how do I keep this person comfortable? And you start asking, is this good for me? That's not selfish. That's maturity. Quick check. When someone is disappointed in you, do you immediately feel guilty? Or do you feel curious? Curious means you've grown, because guilt keeps you trapped. Curiosity gives you options. Here's the second reason. Later in life, your nervous system becomes your teacher. When you're younger, you often ignore your body. You override. You push through. You say yes when you mean no. You stay when your body is screaming. But later, you start noticing patterns. You notice who you feel calm around. You notice who you feel foggy around. And you notice who makes you second guess yourself. And you stop arguing with that after feeling. That's a huge shift, because empaths become powerful when they trust their internal data. Here's a simple indicator you can use immediately. After you spend time with someone, do you feel more like yourself or less? More like yourself means clearer, steadier, more grounded. Less like yourself means tight, guilty, overstimulated, drained. That after feeling is often more honest than your thoughts. Now, the third reason your empathy becomes powerful later in life, you learn boundaries. And boundaries are what turn empathy into influence. Without boundaries, empathy becomes absorption. You take on everyone, you carry everyone, you become the emotional landfill. But with boundaries, empathy becomes a gift. You can see what someone feels without making it your job to fix it. You can understand someone without tolerating disrespect. You can care without collapsing. And later in life, a lot of empaths finally stop confusing kindness with availability. They realize something simple. A kind heart still needs a strong gate. In a moment, I'll give you 2 short boundary sentences that instantly change the way people treat you. But first, I want to name something that's hard to admit. Many empaths are not weak. They're just overexposed. You weren't too sensitive. You were sensitive with no protection. So later in life, when you finally build protection, the same sensitivity that once hurt you becomes your advantage. Let me make it real with a story. Emily is sensitive, observant, and deeply caring. When she was younger, she attracted people who loved being supported. She listened for hours. She gave second chances. She tried to understand everyone's pain, and she kept getting the same outcome. She felt used, not always intentionally, but consistently. One day later in life, Emily notices something different in herself. She doesn't feel angry at people anymore. She feels clear. A friend starts venting again. Same cycle. No change. No ownership. Emily feels the pull to rescue, and then she pauses. She breathes out slowly, and she says, I care about you, and I can listen for 10 minutes, but I can't hold all of this tonight. There's a silence. Emily expects guilt. She expects backlash. Instead, she feels something new, respect for herself. That's when an empath becomes powerful, when empathy stays, but self-abandonment leaves. Now here's the fourth reason it becomes powerful later in life. Your pattern recognition sharpens. Empaths see patterns early, but they often doubt themselves early. You feel something is off, but you talk yourself out of it. You sense a red flag, but you give another chance. You notice inconsistency, but you say, maybe I'm being unfair. Later in life, you stop gaslighting yourself. You don't need 10 examples to believe what you already feel. You don't need a dramatic betrayal to justify a boundary. You don't need permission to protect your peace. And because you've lived longer, you've seen more cycles. You can spot emotional immaturity quickly. You can spot manipulation quickly. You can spot performative kindness quickly. Not with paranoia, with wisdom. Here's a sharp contrast that mature empaths learn. Understanding someone is not the same as trusting them. You can understand why someone is the way they are and still choose distance. That's not cold. That's healthy. Now, reason number 5. Later in life, you stop giving your empathy to people who don't repair. This is a huge one. When you're younger, you might tolerate a lot because you hope people will change. You focus on their potential. You focus on their pain. You focus on what they meant. Later, you care about one thing more than intention: repair. Do they take responsibility? Do they listen? Do they adjust? Do they try? Because relationships don't survive on good intentions. They survive on repair. And an empath becomes incredibly powerful when they stop negotiating with someone's lack of repair. Now, here are the 2 boundary sentences I promised. Simple, clean, human. First one, for disrespect masked as jokes, or that's just how I am. I'm not available for that. Second one, for emotional dumping and constant crisis energy. I care about you, but I can't carry this. Short, calm, no fight. And here's what happens when you start using sentences like that. The wrong people get louder. The right people get clearer. That's how your life upgrades. Now, there's one more reason empathy becomes powerful later in life, and this one is quiet. You stop trying to be exceptional to be loved. A lot of sensitive people, especially those who felt unseen earlier, develop a hidden belief. If I'm good enough, useful enough, impressive enough, then I'll be safe. So you achieve, you help, you perform strength. Later in life, if you're lucky, you realize something freeing. You don't need to be exceptional to be worthy. You just need to be real with the right people. And that's when your empathy turns into grounded confidence, because you're no longer using sensitivity to chase approval. You're using it to choose alignment. Let me give you another story. Michael grew up being the responsible one. He became a high performer. He could read people well, lead well, solve problems fast, but emotionally, he stayed guarded. He didn't trust easily. Later in life, Michael notices something. The people he respects most aren't the loudest. They're the steadiest. So he practices one small shift. When someone pressures him for a fast answer, he stops pleasing. He says, I need time to think. I'll get back to you. No apology. No over-explaining. And something surprising happens. People start treating him differently, not because he became harsh, because he became anchored. That's empath power. It's not emotional intensity, it's emotional stability. Now, if you're listening and thinking, okay, but when does this shift happen? It usually happens when you hit a threshold of exhaustion, a threshold of disappointment, a threshold of realizing that being nice hasn't protected you. And then you choose something new. You choose standards, you choose rest, you choose fewer people, you choose better people, and your empathy becomes powerful because it's no longer scattered, it becomes focused. Here's the simplest way to know if your empath power is growing. You start leaving situations earlier, not walking out dramatically, just leaving earlier from conversations that drain you, earlier from dynamics that confuse you, earlier from people who punish honesty. That's healing. Now, I want to ask you something and answer it honestly. Which one describes you right now? 1, you're still overexposed. 2, you're starting to set boundaries. 3, you're in the lonely but peaceful phase. 4, you're choosing better people and feeling your power. 5, you're rebuilding trust slowly and wisely. Which one is you? Comment 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And let me leave you with this. Your empathy was never the problem. Your lack of protection was. When you learn to protect your nervous system, when you learn to choose repair over chemistry, when you learn to trust your after feeling, your empathy stops being a wound. It becomes your advantage. And the next step after this, the one that makes this power stable, is learning how to stay connected without absorbing other people's energy. Because when you can care without caring, you don't just feel powerful, you stay powerful.